All right, well, I think we will go ahead and get started with just a couple of introductions. I'm Jan Joanitas with Renewing the Countryside, and today we're going to hear from Jessica Joyce, who's the market manager at the Rochester Farmers Market in Rochester, Minnesota, well, you'll hear about the innovation that she has put forward in response to COVID-19 to continue her market. A little background on why Renewing the Countryside and the Farmers Market Hub is hosting this. There have been a group of organizations, my organization, the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture at the U, and the Minnesota Farmers Market Association, who have worked together under a specialty crop block grant. We're just entering into a third of those, but it was through that grant process and the work that we were able to do under that some of the, some infrastructure was in place that Jess was able to kind of jump off on and bring a lot more to the table. So I just quickly want my colleagues who have been part of that project, if you can just introduce yourselves and turn your video on for a second so people can see you. Jane and Kathy and Sarah and Cecilia, if you're on.
Hello, I'm Sarah George and I'm with the Wabasha Farmers Market as well as the Red Wing Farmers Market. And I am one of the mentors on this project.
Thanks, Sarah. Jane, Kathy, Cecilia.
Hi, I'm Jane Jewett. I'm with the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, and I've also been part of the project team and mentor of Northern Minnesota markets.
I saw Kathy's name there, but
sorry, Kathy Zeman, Minnesota Farmers Market Association, joining just a few seconds late.
And is Cecilia on? Or Grace? Okay, well, we will, oh, I do
Grace
see
is on.
Grace. Grace, you want to say hello?
Sure, I can say hello real quick. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining.
Great. All right, well, with that, we'll turn it over to Jess and let her take us through what she's done. And our plan here is to include lots of time for questions. And some of those questions, you can certainly ask them in the chat room, and then we can ask Jess as she goes through things. I think if you have a question while we're going through it, I think that's fine to ask it at the time rather than waiting until the end. But if it gets to be a long discussion, I might just move it to the end if it's something that can be answered relatively quickly. So with that, and I would just say if you're not muted when you're not talking, please put yourself on mute. I can also mute you. Apparently that's the great power I have as being the host. So Jess, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Jess Joyce. I hope that everyone can see my screen. I'm assuming that you can. So Jan went through the background to this project, and those of you who are part of Rochester Farmers Markets or have been associated with the project are familiar with the fact that we were part of this pilot program, which was funded by a specialty crop block grant since 2018. And the original idea with the Farmers Market Hub was that it was a way to diversify income for farmers market growers and to reach out to our institutions, to restaurants, to schools, to healthcare organizations, and provide a wholesale mechanism to sell to those institutions. So that is where a lot of the infrastructure came from on this, and why a couple weeks ago, when the world turned upside down a little bit, we felt that we had what we needed to start using the farmers market as a centralized hub to aggregate farmers products and then sell them to individual consumers instead of institutions. So I don't know, Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about Wabasha Farmers Market and about the 10 markets that are involved in this project?
Sure. We started this project in 2018 through the specialty crop block grant with the Department of Agriculture, where we were going to aggregate or combine produce from multiple farms to sell to those schools, hospitals, and restaurants. And we asked around the state of Minnesota who would be interested in joining us. So we have Cook, Aiken, Grand Rapids, Chisago City, Richfield, Rochester, Cannon Falls, Lake City, Wabasha, and I feel like I'm missing one. Cannon Falls, Rochester, Wabasha, Cook.
I think that's right.
Grand Rapids. Anyhow, we started this project 3 years ago with the intention of being able to help these farmers markets become food hubs without a brick and mortar in a safe and legal manner to provide access to local foods to those institutions that are looking for it. Oftentimes there's obstacles when you're sourcing local foods, and some of those obstacles, I'm a farmer myself, I'm a market manager, and I work in a restaurant that uses as much locally grown produce as they can. And so that allows me to see some of those obstacles from many different channels. And in seeing that, I was trying to think through what are some ways that we could overcome those. And having an online platform where product is available seemed to make a lot of sense. So that's where this project started. Okay.
Yep. So when we set it up, the idea was that the market would actually pull a profit from being the aggregator. So the idea is farmers will list their products on the platform, and then the hub puts a 14% markup on the grower price. So the customer in this example pays $1.14. The farmer keeps $1 and the hub keeps 14 cents. So that is one of the few models, and I've heard it presented this way, that the market is actually able to help offset some of its operating costs. So I put together a little schematic here for how this works for retail customers. And we're going to walk through some photos of how it looks at our market. But basically, the farmers have listed their products on an online store. The customers make a purchase online, and then the farmers bring their product all to the market on a certain day or time. And we go through and individually pack orders for individual customers, and then the customers come through our drive-through line and we load their groceries into their vehicles. So that's how it's worked the past couple of weeks. It's an evolving model, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of that approach. In order to pull this off, Rochester Farmers Markets is licensed as a food handler through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And I know that that has what has enabled us to serve as an aggregator. I think I talked about the markup, other things that we are using that 14% to pay for. So we coordinate this project. We do a lot of customer service. We onboard the vendors. We market this model to the customers, to the community. There's a fee associated with being licensed as a food handler. And then we have equipment costs and costs for the online platform. The benefit, though, is that we're using, as Sarah mentioned, it's a low overhead approach. The market already exists, that the fact that the farmers have agreed to meet up on a specific date is already in place. So we have a lot of the resources, and we're limiting costs as far as a traditional food hub, which has a brick and mortar building and a lot of overhead operating costs. Sarah did a lot of work in 2018 vetting online platforms, and the way that we are currently set up is with a provider called Local Line, who's out of Canada. Sarah can talk a little bit about how Local Line works.
Absolutely. So Local Line is an online sales platform where where you can aggregate or combine produce from multiple farms. In the picture you see here, you're going to see the beef patties. Underneath the name beef patties, it actually says Manning Meats. You can see who the farmer is, how much product they have, what the price is, if there's differences in price breaks. And the very next line, those Chioggia beets are from Fairview Farm. So you can have it all listed on one sales platform in one place. So your institutions or your farmers market customers don't have to visit multiple websites in order to place orders for each of the individual farmers. In 2018, I did receive a SARE grant to do some research for online sales platforms, and dove deep into 26 different platforms and found that at that point in time, actually found that Local Orbit was the one that would be most convenient for our use. Local Line and Local Orbit have since merged, and therefore Local Line is the platform of our choice. We are not saying that Local Line is the platform that everybody should use. We're just using this as the opportunity. This is the one that we are using. Through this platform, there's several different options for you to consider. You can do a monthly or an annual subscription like she has listed here. If you prepay annually, they do give you, they may offer you a discount for the prepaid annual subscription. That hub versus market model is something to consider when you're looking at setting up your platform. So the hub model is what we have. And the hub model is one payment, one checkout, one delivery, or one pickup, depending on which way you want to go. Where the market model, you're still going to see the same thing on the sales platform, except when you get to the checkout. At the checkout, each of your individual vendors at a farmer's market are going to have their own delivery or delivery fee or pickup location. They're also going to have their own checkout. And so if you purchase products from 5 farmers, you're going to have to check out 5 separate times and work out the delivery logistics on that. For us, we wanted to make it convenient on the farmer side and on the buyer side. And we chose that hub model because then we were doing the aggregating or the combining. Through the hub model, very briefly, that does mean that all funds now do run through the farmer's market instead of running through the vendor's pockets. So that's a new thing to think about.
Right, so we had this platform in place. There's a learning curve associated with it. But we do now have, I believe it's 19 suppliers that are active on that platform and selling products that they would otherwise have been selling at our indoor winter farmers markets. And then I did want to leave some space for Kathy to step in and talk about the evolution of the legalities and recommendations for farmers markets in Minnesota, and what we've been working on over the past couple of weeks.
Thanks, Jess. Kathy Zeman, Minnesota Farmers Market Association. So on March 16th, when the Executive Order 04 went through, did say markets would be allowed to stay open. We were in the same category as grocery stores. And since it didn't explicitly say farmers markets, and we wanted to make sure that we were considered essential services in Minnesota, we did reach out to Commissioner Tom Peterson. He's our Ag Commissioner, a wonderful Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And Commissioner Peterson worked that magic and made sure that it did come down that farmers markets are exempted from closing as long as we do not offer on-site consumption of food. That includes food sampling. And then we're encouraged to do drive-throughs like what Jess is doing at the Rochester Farmers Market. We follow the 6 feet social distancing and we wash our hands. And so today, even today, we're all still good to go as long as we continue to do those things.
Did you want to mention the Thursday calls too?
Oh, thanks, Jess. So every Thursday, anybody is welcome to jump on our open Zoom calls. It's an hour long. They might be Hopefully we get them down to 10 minutes and then 5 minutes, because it means we've solved all of our issues. But currently it's an hour, and tomorrow I know we're going to lead with some innovative layout designs for markets that we're testing, and we'll have some SNAP and Market Buck updates from David Nicholson and Hunger Solutions. We'll start with those, and then you can jump on and ask any question you want related to farmers markets in 2020. And we've got all the people on there so we can quickly get answers. And if we can't, we just we'll get them the next week. Okay. So thanks, Jess.
Yeah, you bet. So that's where we started out, trying to gather and use and make productive progress with all of this information coming from the state level, from the federal level, and then from our local public health department. So this was on, let's see, March 16th that the initial executive order came out. And so our next market after that point was March 21st. And we have since had one other indoor winter farmers market on April 4th. Our approach after consulting with my board of directors was to try to support as many of our businesses as possible. So we put into place having the winter market open with precautions. And then we also implemented this drive-through pilot. So I'll go somewhat quickly through our approach to the indoor market being open, and then spend a little more time on the drive-through. Just a quick summary about our farmers market. We are the only growers market in Rochester, Minnesota. Rochester has a population of about 120,000. Typically, we operate 3 markets. We are open year-round. We have about 100 small businesses that are part of our market association. Let's see, the summer Saturday markets, we average between 65 and 75 vendors per market. And then winter is about 25 to 30. This was the layout that we put into place for being open and hosting the drive-through at the same time. The blue square in your screen is our winter farmers market building. So that's where the photos that you're going to see of hand wash stations and the market info booth and our vendors being spaced out. That took place inside the building. And then we were fortunate that the road was closed here. So we converted the whole space to one side of the building into this drive-through pickup zone. Prior to this, I mentioned that we had 25 to 30 vendors, 28 to 30 per market. Our typical winter markets took 2 staff to manage. We saw several hundred customers a week, and we had an average market gross sales of over $14,000. Prior to March, the middle of March, we were seeing some of our best winter markets ever. We had vendor sales anywhere in the $400 to $1,400 a week range. So shaping up to be a pretty solid season. This is just for comparison to some of the future numbers. When we were looking at this guidance, we felt, and we still currently feel, that the most important things we need to achieve at an open farmers market are achieving the physical distancing of 6 feet, having plentiful access to hand washing, and doing a lot of communicating and enforcement to ensure that customers are shopping efficiently. This photo is from our market on the 21st of March. And so since then, we have seen new recommendations about personal protective equipment, about face shields, and we plan to have those in place for the next open farmers market. So increasing signage, increasing communication. How are we going to communicate to our customers this new normal that we would like them to achieve? We have been focusing on the phrase shop efficiently. Another phrase that I've been hearing a lot that I think is critical that we implement is limiting the number of shoppers per family, and limiting any kind of congregation inside of the market. We also had, because this market is indoors, we had volunteers there to open the door, encourage sanitary practices, and then also point out that we had hand wash stations for everyone to use just inside. This is our 2 hand wash stations just inside the door. I've pointed out to several folks that, and MFMA has a beautiful diagram for how to put together a really low budget hand wash station. We also were fortunate to have a SHIP grant, Statewide Health Improvement Partnership grant, that purchased this sturdy hand wash station on the left. And that unit was about $450, and I highly recommend it. Another thing, we used additional signage around the hand wash stations. We felt that those were really well used and they were well received by our customers. I think that that's something unique to farmers markets that we aren't seeing yet at grocery stores, is just one opportunity after another to wash your hands. On the photo on the right is our market info booth setup from a couple of weeks ago. At this point, we were still accepting tokens. We use the token system to accept SNAP as well as credit and debit at the market. And research is showing us that the on hard surfaces like on the wooden or plastic tokens, those sit for a week after use, and so they are considered to still be sanitary when we bring them back into the market the next week. We received a lot of positive feedback from customers at this first open market on the 21st. I think customers most appreciated the folks at the door. And then part of this talk, we wanted to look in a little more detail at the economics of one option versus the other, since Rochester was able to do both. So some expenses associated with staying open. We had 2 market staff, some 10-person hours. Staffing those markets, we also had 3 door volunteers, total of 6 hours. I mentioned that the hand wash station was $450, and then we had 5 hand wash stations that were the cheaper ones arranged throughout the building. Another cost was associated with token sanitizing, and because in Minnesota the SNAP dollars are associated with market bucks bonus match, we are going to be throwing those away every week and using them as a single-use item, so we might incur some additional costs purchasing new tokens and market bucks. Benefits to staying open. This market was able to have 19 vendors even though we were inside. We achieved that in a safe way. Median sales for vendors at that market was $343 and a gross of $7,600. So that first market was probably about half as profitable as the previous or as the average winter market. I think this past weekend was even slower. So, and we're not sure if that's a communication issue, if it's just a general trend of the public not coming out to the market. Another issue we ran into is we had so much success with our drive-through that it looked from the road like the market was not open because everyone was waiting in line. So some communication, some hurdles to work through with that. I was glad that we had winter farmers markets running so that we got a chance to practice with these new best practices. So here's the walkthrough of our online ordering. We did a drive-through pickup and we also offered delivery. I had a diagram at the very beginning that showed how we had vendors' products sorted into individual customer packages. That was the overall layout for this whole process. I am seeing, but not actually seeing, questions pop up. And so, Jan, if you're seeing those in the chat and want to just restate them, I'd be happy to answer questions as we're going along also.
I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks. So our vendors, we asked them to individually package and individually label each of their orders. And that worked out really great. So you can see, and some of them, Squash Blossom Farm put a lot of extra effort into encouraging some positivity with their labeling. But that idea of individual packaging was also to decrease number of people touching the product in between the farmer and the consumer. We also found that having the vendors label their packages if they had more than one package, one of one or one of two, two of two, etc. That's really critical in making sure we get everything in the right order. Oh, I'm sorry. On the tables, we had arranged customer invoices in a sequential row throughout the room. This is what tables look like when they were full of product. We really quickly learned that the orders took up a lot more space than we were anticipating. And so having a space to arrange tables in this configuration is one of our big limits so far. So this week we're recommending vendors, if they have sold more than one table's worth of product through this system, we're asking them to bring tables so that we can stage their product for them. As folks arrived at the drive-thru, we had a volunteer on the road directing them where to go. We had our local line platform set up on a purchase order system, so you can actually place an order without paying online. The reason that we did this, one was to encourage customers who don't feel safe putting their credit card information on the internet. And then another was so that we were still able to accept SNAP. You cannot use an EBT card to buy food online. However, we were able to process SNAP transactions at the market when they showed up. I've heard this mentioned before, and it was so true this last weekend that people are so willing to follow instructions and follow in line. We didn't have any trouble with traffic at all. They would show up at the door. This door is where we were going into the building to fetch orders. They would confirm their order number with a volunteer who would check to make sure that they had paid, and if they hadn't, would run their card for them. And then we had them swing around and wait in a couple of parallel rows parked for a volunteer to retrieve their order. Another key thing that we learned here is that we needed to assign a runner to each vehicle as it went through. So when we knew their order number, we assigned that to a volunteer, and the volunteer was responsible for retrieving the entire order and putting it in that vehicle before the car was complete. We had a separate sanitation station for our volunteers, so they had their hand wash right there. And then we also offered gloves, and then of course this week we will have masks for the volunteers. This is a local line thing. So customer placing an order receives an order number in their email. And we have the ability through this system to email every customer who's made a purchase with a couple of tips. I was astonished at how well they read their emails. We said, you know, please prepare your order and put it in your driver's side window. And this weekend, I would say 80% of the cars never rolled down their window, right? They just had the number in the window and we retrieved their order. So very, very low personal contact. Again, the products arranged on the tables. One thing we found was that having a larger bag or having some way to put orders together was really critical. We had MetroNet sponsor originally reusable bags. We're not reusing the bags right now. And so that's a continual cost that we're having to evaluate if we can or cannot get those bags sponsored every week. We had 120 orders the first week and 245 the second. So we're going through a lot of these bags. Another consideration with this model, we are able to sell frozen meats, dairy, eggs, all sorts of products through the system that need to be refrigerated and they need to be kept temperature controlled. I actually might pause here and let Jane step in with how temperature control works and what we needed to achieve there. Jane, are you available to do that?
Sure, I can jump in on that. So temperature control mainly is just, you know, keeping hot food hot, keeping cold food cold. And in the case of this market, it was keeping cold food cold. So eggs in Minnesota need to be held at 45 degrees Fahrenheit or lower after they've been candled, graded, packed, labeled, and so forth. And then any meat or dairy that is not frozen needs to be held at 41 degrees or lower. And any frozen items need to be held at 0 degrees or lower. So there, you know, that was a little bit of a sticky wicket, I guess, for the market because they were holding product in trailers outside. And so that product was separate from the rest of the order and then had to be grabbed and assembled with the rest of the order when the customer showed up. We do have a state of Minnesota guidance document on staging food for delivery. And that does allow holding deliveries in coolers as long as those temps can be maintained. So that might give some markets more flexibility if you don't have a trailer or a freezer. But then you have to have a whole bunch of coolers and ice packs and so forth. So that is a little bit of a logistical problem, and I'll turn it back to Jess to talk about how they.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that we have done, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this works this weekend, is similar with the tables. We requested that vendors who sold enough product that they would need to keep it in a cooler, they commit to leaving their cooling system with us for the whole market. So for example, one of my vendors works out of a refrigerated van, and they brought that whole van and plugged it in and actually had one of their children stand in the vehicle and help us with the organization of their products and ensure that their products stayed cold, which the vendor was into that too. Obviously, that is really important to their quality, that they are able to keep stuff cold. So anyway, refrigeration is something to work through, and certainly something as we're looking forward to summer when it gets hot and everything wilts. Keeping things cold while they're being staged for pickup is going to be one of our biggest challenges. I wanted to talk a little about the numbers. I know it's not the most interesting thing to look at tables, but just a comparison from our first week to our second week. So these were 2 weeks apart. We had double the number of orders. The success rate on here has to do with orders after the end of the day that we felt the need to follow up on. And Sarah and I are both very detail-oriented people. And so we spent a lot of time and work responding to customer questions, any concerns that were brought up. Certainly the first week we had some issues where products didn't end up in the bags that they should have been, or they were miscounted. And so we made additional deliveries after the fact of items that were missed. So in doubling our orders, we went down we went from about 5 errors to about 25 errors. But certainly a great learning experience, and we came away with a lot of lessons learned that I think will help limit those issues. Again, going back to the space on the tables, that was probably one of the key parts where we were making errors, was not having good separation between orders on the tables. So yeah, double the number of orders, but almost 3 times the sales in the second week. So we have not had to promote this at all, and I have heard some advice from other groups working on these kinds of projects to try to keep them small, because it is very overwhelming. So with that markup, the market has profited from each of those events. So $700 the first week, $1,700 the second week. That has been sufficient so far to offset the time that we've put into it. So really great from a sustainability perspective. One thing that's been challenging from an accounting point of view is that the money's coming in all sorts of different ways. They're paying online, they're paying with check and cash at the market. We had a partner organization there with a PayPal account that they were paying through. So the actual follow-up on the accounting has been challenging. We also saw average purchase increase in the second week, and then an increase in the suppliers participating. I've got another graph of this if anyone loves graphs as much as me. So these are box and whisker plots. On the left is the hub sales. So basically you can see that we increased significantly in our number of sales. And then those are the payments to the vendors. So the first week vendors made between 100 and 350 bucks. And then the second week they made 150 to 1,000. So it was very successful for our vendors who were participating. And then on the right, average customer purchases. So more purchases, higher dollar the second time around. And then as far as staffing, this is absolutely the biggest cost associated with this project. And we've been fortunate that we've had a huge amount of volunteer support and people who are passionate about making this work. But here's some of the ways that we were using staff. So prior to opening, we put a lot of staff time into learning the platform, onboarding vendors, managing the platform, and working through kind of kinks in that system, communicating everything to all of the vendors and all of the customers, and then setup of the market space. On the day of, we also relied really heavily on volunteers. I don't know how we're going to do this without a flock of people trying to be useful. But the volunteers have been amazing. So they do all of the sorting and packing on the morning of the market. And they also served as quality control. So going back through and making sure the orders were correct. Working out any issues. Sometimes we had to go to the market vendors and acquire extra product or return doubles of things. We had what we called librarians. So having a volunteer who's versed in what orders are on what tables is really important. Having the greeter at the door, traffic control, and then assigning individual volunteers to each vehicle that showed up. And then in the wrap up, this has mostly been staff time too, as far as making sure that the accounting is in the right place, paying out to vendors to make it worth their while. And then we did some follow-ups and surveying of customers after the fact. A little bit of a breakdown on staff time. These are pretty information heavy graphs, but the first week we spent a total of 238 hours. Only 87 of those were paid on the project. We figured a staff cost of 1,400. You can see that most of the work went into setup and onboarding, and then followed by work on the day of, which was spread between, I think it was 15 volunteers and 2 staff, and then time on wrap up. So, and then on the right, about equal time was spent with sorting and packing and working on the platform. A lot more time in the first week on communication and working with the team. So then let's see, comparatively, the second week we were about 100 hours less. So 146 hours went to setting it up, pretty equally split between pre-work and then day of work. I'm going to call for some reinforcements on this slide, but this is when I say that the infrastructure was already in place, there's a lot that goes into thinking about the market as an aggregator. So we needed to be licensed. We needed to have a relationship with an MDA inspector. In order to get our license, we needed to develop policies to ensure that our workers had good hygiene and that our products were transported in a clean manner. We needed to do some work on insurance. And then there has since been some accounting issues that we hadn't thought through. For example, the farmers market had never charged sales tax before. So I've got help from my vendors who deal with that all the time, working on that. And then I think I'm going to throw this one to Jane also. So when we're looking at sustainability, there are costs associated with each of these steps. And so that's just something that folks need to consider. And I don't know, Jane, did you want to talk any more about sustainability?
Sure, I can talk about that a little bit. So the markets that have been involved in this specialty crop block grant project have each been asked to do a sustainability estimate where the market walks through these costs that Jess listed and also their potential for income through the market for that 14% markup. I see Elena Byrne just posted that co-ops, like brick and mortar co-ops, add more than the 14% margin. Our markets in this project were adding a 12 to 14% markup to farmers' products because of recommendations and research done by the Cooperative Development Services Organization in Wisconsin. They have researched the costs of each portion of the supply chain and determined that for the services that our markets were offering with this aggregation and distribution, that the 12 to 14% range was appropriate. So, so looking at what the markets need to pull in dollars of total sales through the market itself in order to capture enough money through that 14% to maintain the market functions. Some of the markets in smaller cities were looking at around $30,000 worth of product. Jess, I did not happen to look at Rochester's sustainability estimate. So do you remember what you came up with for total dollar sales you had to pull through?
Yeah, I believe that it was 36,000. But I think that the workload that we estimated for that model was less than this one. There's a lot more work involved when your customers are 600 different people as opposed to 5 or 6 large buyers.
Correct. Yep. So we do have a couple of example spreadsheets available for that sustainability estimate if people are interested in them. One of them is a little bit more of a thinking through with pen and paper, perhaps, or in your mind, and then putting things into the spreadsheet. And one of them developed by Cecilia Coulter, who's one of our project team members, has a more automated method of doing those calculations with boxes that will calculate for you the amount of time of manager time that you need to add, like per additional customer, per additional vendor, per additional CSA box, and things like that. So it is definitely something that customers really want to see, but there are definitely also costs to the market that need to be figured out and accounted for if this is going to be sustainable.
Yeah, we're clearly still working through that ourselves. I wanted to go a little bit into the wrap up. So Jan Joanidas, who's hosting this call, put together a survey for our vendors after the first week that we offered this option. We asked them how often they typically shop at our regular farmers markets, and we found out that most of these customers were our regular customers. That's probably how they heard about it, since they're already following our communications. This, however, I thought was incredibly important, especially given today's circumstances. So we asked customers, would you have shopped at the farmers market on Saturday if the online ordering pickup was not available? And more than 3/4 of them said that they would not have shopped if they couldn't have shopped online. And so that's something that we can't ignore. And that is part of what's driving us to push this project forward and make it work, even though we're not sure yet completely how to make it sustainable. Similarly, the feedback has been incredible. From the management standpoint, it's intimidating, it's frustrating. Sometimes it seems like you have no idea what you're doing, but the customers have been so completely patient and supportive and understanding and willing to listen and read their emails. And I think they will give you a little bit of leeway as you're figuring this out. Another thing that we are working on and working through is communication. I think I mentioned before that having a line for the drive-through caused customers not to think that we were open as a farmer's market. And so that's challenging when you're in the business of trying to support 100 different small businesses. You want them all to succeed. And so how are we going to communicate if we're open, how we're open, what we want shopping to look like, how we want customers to get online, what happens if we have vendors who don't want to sell with our online system, how are we going to support them? So a couple of things that we're trying, we reminded everyone that we were open. We used a newsletter to kind of tell the longer story. And then we posted links to our online store on our website. We also created a blog list that featured each of our vendors who sell online but don't sell through our platform. And then we added a Shop Now button to our Facebook. I mentioned the customer feedback. The media feedback has also been really positive. I know that that is not uniformly the case. And so I feel fortunate in our community, at least, that we haven't had to deal with some of the negative feedback. I think it's hard because a lot of the public views a farmer's market as a social gathering or just a fun thing that people do. And we have cast away that identity and really tried to embrace the idea that this is a grocery market, that this is a critical infrastructure for our community. And so the media that came out to that market that first weekend, they were willing to hear that and help us tell that story. So that's my summary. That's what I've got. I see that there are questions coming through. I think I'm going to hand back to Jan to see what you guys want to talk about next.
Yeah, and I will bring up just a couple of the questions that in the chat, and others feel free to bring them up too. And if people want to, unmute and ask a question, that is fine too. Steve asked about whether the market had to toss anything and if there was any shrinkage.
We're talking about product?
Yep.
So we have not, and I mentioned at the beginning that we were requiring the vendors to individually package their own products. And for this model, I think that has been really critical. And when we had customer issues or concerns about the products, we reminded them that my staff and our volunteers had not visually inspected or opened or looked into the bags at all. We were just taking the products that we were given and repackaging them into customer orders. I think that's important from a public health standpoint, but it is also important to keep in mind that there are lots of different businesses in our market, and when summer comes around and we have 70 different people with green beans, that's going to be, right now looks like it's going to be on the customer to browse by supplier and to build a relationship with a farmer and use that knowledge of the farmer's quality to make their decision.
Great. There was another question about whether there was any noise from any of the other groceries in town.
We have an excellent relationship with our co-op, and it was great. I actually was intimidated about how this was going to go. I was fielding a lot of calls from vendors, and so I stopped into the co-op and chatted with many of their cashiers and asked what they had been told by their management and how they were implementing best practices. So we learned a lot from working with them, and I've seen them share our stuff on social media. So People's Food Co-op in Rochester, high five to them.
Great.
Yes, there's a question on here about when did the vendors and farmers deliver their product and what was the assembly time for 245 tote bags?
Yeah, it's a good time of year in Minnesota. It's cold outside and things keep really well. So we did all of the root crops, all of the non-perishable products for the most part on Friday afternoon. So 2 hours on Friday and then 3 hours on Saturday morning. So it took us to assemble them. I would like to say that they were perfectly assembled by that point, but again, with having to do the meat in a second wave or trying to keep the meat in freezers until the last possible minute, we were still sorting even as we were delivering to customers.
Michelle asked about seeing the sustainability spreadsheets, and we can make those available. I believe I have everybody's email because you had to register, so I can send out an email to everyone with some links to the things that were shared. Here's a question from Beth. Do you think using the platform will encourage farmers to use the platform for wholesale/institutional sales?
On this platform, sure. So there's a couple of cool features that you can do depending on your price point. The hub can split up their customer base into what are called catalogs. And the idea there is that you could have a catalog that was a wholesale catalog and a catalog that was a retail catalog. And the farmers would post their products in different package sizes. And the growers can all set their own price points. So for example, they could sell cases of eggs at a wholesale price, dozens of eggs at a retail price, and those would pull from the same inventory. So there's some interesting and exciting flexibility there.
Well, one thing that I would add was with this platform at the markets across the state that have been part of this project, getting farmers to put their product up on the platform has been somewhat challenging. But when this happened, I think you had a rush of folks in Rochester who may have not been ready prior, and then all of a sudden, because this opportunity came up and they saw the value of it, asked for help getting up. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yeah, and I think we're fortunate that this happened over the winter. We have had farmers being proactive, even though they don't have product ready now, trying to get on the platform and get comfortable with it so that they are ready to add inventory when they have it.
Great.
I'm
Have you
going to
had
say
any-
that Susan,
Go ahead.
whoops. I was just going to say that Susan is on the call and is putting some really good info in here. And I'm going to put her on the spot and see if she would mind actually talking for a moment about what the platform has meant to you as a vendor on the sales platform and what it looks like on your point. Because I think it's helpful to hear your side. Susan, are you okay with that?
Sure, I'm happy to answer any questions.
So everyone, Susan is a vendor at the Rochester Farmers Market that makes amazing bread. Go ahead, Susan.
We've had a couple of small glitches. The first week, there was confusion with the platform in downloading our orders, and we missed a couple. And the second week, it was a confusion in packaging one order. So I apologize to Jess and the volunteers for messing those up. But in all other respects, it's been really awesome. Totally straightforward, pretty easy. And I really like that we have our orders a couple days ahead. So like I'll be getting my ingredients this afternoon for my baking tomorrow and Friday for Saturday. So I won't have to guess how much to make. It'll all be sold and I won't have leftover stuff.
This is Kathy. If I could ask Susan a follow-up question. So you said in your post that you increased, so you have extra time in packaging. So that would have increased your costs. So did you increase your price, or do you think it was a net because then you also didn't bring more product than you could sell? How do you think you netted financially there?
I didn't increase the price because there was already that additional 14% that was going to the farmers market. And I was really worried about increasing prices beyond that. I didn't also reduce the price. I think we came out okay. For one thing, we didn't have our booth fee. I mean, we're paying an annual fee, but we saved a little bit there, and we didn't have the loss. So yeah, I think it was okay. And a couple people inquired about, oh, it's more expensive. And I said, well, that's to sustain the program and all the extra service delivering it out to you, and they were understanding about that.
That kind of leads into another question that Brett asked. Have you had customers who voiced any unhappiness, either with quality issues or price, as Susan indicated?
I haven't, and it's kind of interesting because, well, usually my husband goes to the market on Saturday mornings, so I'm not always there, and I don't know all the customers by name, but I think we have a lot of new customers that I don't recognize.
Interesting.
And I haven't heard a lot of personal feedback either way, like, wow, this is amazing, or I'm not satisfied. But our sales doubled from the first week to the second, so, and even more this coming week. So
Great. Jess, have you heard any feedback? Any negative?
I have not, and I feel like it might be a biased estimate. Rochester is fortunate in that we have a higher income population around us, and so maybe those are the people that are shopping. We only had one or two customers using SNAP through the line, so I'm not sure. There's a good chance that the customers that are taking advantage of this have the luxury of being able to do so. But no, like I mentioned, the customer feedback has been 99.9% incredibly positive.
Great.
I did address the quality a little bit before. Mostly we recommend if they were not happy with the quality that they should try a different vendor.
Great. Lottie asks, she'd love to hear more about plans for summer markets with the system in place, and how will you handle perishability of produce and cheese?
I would love to have an answer to that question. So we are currently looking at some grant opportunities. I think the size and scale of our market and what we're seeing right now definitely lends itself to trying to find a permanent refrigerated space. And then it could kind of go either way. If we're trying to keep the market open and do both, we'd split them so they're not on the same day. That would take a little bit less work. You could also, pull staff from the vendors, require the vendors to do more of the upfront legwork, to do some of the sorting themselves. I am not sure how it's going to go. We'll keep in touch.
Well, and for those of you, I don't know, Jess, if your picture comes up because your screen is up here, but Jess is down here in the left corner on the slide there. So that is who is talking. So there was also a question in terms of, is there a capacity in terms of how many vendors you could actually, I guess, how many vendors do you think you could, ramp up to if you have 19 now, and how many customers?
Right? We're not saying no to anybody yet. I think there's some flexibility to set limits that we haven't explored. For example, we could say vendors can only list their top 5 products or something like that. I don't know how to be the most fair about that, but for now we're accepting everything. It's really important in the platform that you keep your products organized. We have some strict rules for how products need to be listed on the platform, and then you can set them into categories. And so the idea is to improve the shopping experience for our customers. So for example, we require that the generic category be first. So a product like Susan's products will need to say bread, comma, and then she can go into detail about what kind of bread.
And someone had asked about produce, and I would say that you have had microgreens and lettuce and spinach and cheese already. So there has been management of that.
Right. And like I said, we're fortunate that it's cold outside. Things are staying fresh. And then we have a building currently to stage our products, and we may or may not have access to that building in the summer. So putting them outside is going to be an issue. We did actually this past weekend have a little bit of trouble with basil, and I know basil is uniquely sensitive to temperature change. So that's something to keep in mind.
And I'm going to jump in there, Jess. There's some, we do have currently down in Rochester a walk-in cooler that is, it's a trailer that you can put behind a vehicle that was converted into a walk-in cooler using a CoolBot. You just hook it up to an air conditioner and order a CoolBot and put that in a walk-in cooler. Or you convert your trailer into a walk-in cooler. That was done. It is Wabasha's walk-in cooler from Wabasha Farmers Market that was SHIP funded. And that has enabled us in Wabasha to hold the product during the market so that we can aggregate it and get that out. And we felt that that was needed, and thankfully had that down in Rochester. But that's something to think about that can help overcome some of these obstacles as we're looking forward into the summer. Most of the markets throughout the state of Minnesota, or anywhere, I guess, probably aren't as blessed as Rochester with 100 different vendors. So a walk-in cooler like that would suffice for some of those cold products. Just throwing that up there.
Great. There were some questions here about with the advent of the recommendations to wear masks, do you see the market requiring this?
I do see that. I don't have a mandate from my board of directors yet, but I do think that that would be the case.
And I know you've asked your volunteers for this weekend to wear masks.
Right. And we've actually had vendors, Susan volunteered to help make some masks. I don't want to put the whole work of that on anybody, but we can probably collaborate on that. We're a creative group of people, so.
And then about delivery vehicles in the summer, how will you keep frozen meats frozen?
This is some of what Jane mentioned before. So we need to do some work on benchmarking the ability of a volunteer's camp cooler to keep frozen products frozen, and what kind of cold packing we need to do to manage that, and how long they can sit in the vehicle before they need to be delivered. So one of the benefits to having volunteer deliveries is that we could conceivably have as many volunteers as we have orders. So we could really cut down on the delivery time there. We also have the ability to independently assign a delivery fee to these orders. So there's a chance that we could up that delivery fee if we need to end up packaging on ice or on dry ice.
What is the delivery fee you're charging now, Jess?
Right now, and there's a couple of ways that you can limit it. So we charge, I believe it's $5 to deliver here in Rochester, and you have to have a minimum purchase, I think, of $50. And then the way that Local Line is set up, your delivery regions are by city code. So we've actually reached out to a couple of the neighboring communities and have, I think, $10 delivery fees for the adjacent towns.
Great. So Jake has a good question here. He says, in terms of, really impressed of how you've pivoted in terms of risk of spreading virus, it seems there's more risk to the managers and volunteers assembling the orders. Do you feel the process went, how do you feel the process went in terms of social distancing? And what is your protocol for reducing risk to those assembling orders?
Yeah, something I think that we definitely need to do better, and this is a management thing that I'm learning, is typically the farmers market has 1 or 2 volunteers per week. So the idea of having 17 to 20 volunteers was new to me. And so we do have that volunteer hygiene worker sanitation policy that is signed at the beginning. So that's sent to the volunteers the week before. We had them review that. We had them sign it when they showed up on site. But I definitely want to do more in the way of a pre-job brief to explain not only our process for sorting and packing, but how we're going to minimize risk. I have seen other markets require that the customers be able to pop their own trunk. We had our volunteers instructed to point at the back of the vehicle or to ask if they could put it in the back, but we were also allowing volunteers to put products in the back seat. So those are things that we can adjust to improve safety.
Someone asks, am I correct that the vendors upload their items pics to the platform?
Yes, so and absolutely, pictures are so important. We have done our best to help our vendors out getting online. So we have a good supply of farmers market stock photos that we've been substituting onto the platform if they don't have a picture. But yeah, absolutely, the more the vendors can do themselves, the quicker their own products are going to sell. Plus, it helps with the validity. When the customer purchases a product, they really would like the photo to show what that product is going to be.
And Jess, either you or I think in some cases Sarah has I think you mentioned, helped them to kind of learn how to use the platform, which isn't super difficult, but if you're not used to it, it takes a little.
Yeah, and you can maybe talk a little bit about getting a grant for that. So fortunately, right now we have time for one-on-one vendor onboarding via Zoom call. So that's been really important to do screen sharing. And actually, I guess maybe Susan can talk about her experience with the screen share call.
Yeah, I talked to both Sarah and Jess on a Zoom call when I was first setting it up, and they're able to walk me through it really easily and quickly, and they're so fantastic, both of them.
Yeah, it's not always the most intuitive system, so having the ability to see what the vendor is seeing, you can help show them the common pitfalls. For example, in this system, there's currently an issue where it's easy to put in a product that has a value of $0. So we've had to be really careful reviewing those to make sure those $0 packages aren't showing up live on our store.
That happened to me.
That's a big bummer. Typically, anytime you're trying something new, it is a little bit more complicated to understand it. And so just being able to see what the farmer or the vendor is working on has been really helpful in order to give them just a little hand while they're figuring things out. Oftentimes it doesn't just come with the questions of how do I use local line, how do I add my product, but how do I see who the customer is and how do I know when I'm going to get paid and how should I package it, are often hand in hand during that conversation. So you have to think your way through that as you're setting these things up. You know, depending on which model you're going to be using and which platform you're going to be using, it comes with those questions. So things to think your way through as you're seeing which things you can implement into your market.
Right. So there was some questions about the 14% and how that might impact people who at this time may have lower income than normal, and a response to that you all are still taking SNAP, although I think you said there wasn't too many SNAP orders, Jess.
Right. That's where we're at right now, especially because we are still able to be open as a market and we offer SNAP and the bonus instead of $10 market bucks at the market. That was one solution. Something I would love to explore further that I know Sarah has tried. Her market puts together market shares. So there's some potential there that during the summer when we have plentiful produce that you could put together a share box with a value of $20 and sell it to a SNAP customer for 10. So half price produce box. Great.
There are a couple good links here, and we will copy out these links and make them available. But Tina at SHIP, who's been a great help in Wabasha and just kind of a leader on this, has a link to the CoolBot trailer that Sarah was talking about. Jane has continued to put up some of these different docs, personal health and hygiene sample protocols. One thing about this team that has been working together, there are a lot of good materials. And so we have a how-to manual that wasn't started with the thought of the drive-through market, that was more on the aggregation project. And now we're going to need to add chapters on the drive-through. But lots of good information that we will happily share with folks. And and also just realize that this is I think as Jess said, that it's kind of an evolving, adapting, seeing what works and then kind of tweaking to improve. There's a question: do we give instructions or guidance to buyers about how to handle the products, packaging, bags when they get them home?
We have not done that yet. What did you have in mind?
Jake?
Can you hear me all right, Jan?
Yes.
Yeah. I've just heard of some like restaurants that are offering takeout that provide guidance, how to open the bag and washing hands and washing produce and that kind of thing. I don't have specifics of what they recommend, but I know that there are some guidelines or suggestions of how to handle things, because in the end, all these things have been touched by multiple hands, and just the more that we can reduce that risk, the better. And so I'm just curious what your thinking is on that.
Yeah, we've responded certainly to some queries about can they return the bags, and it's tough because farmers markets are generally, perceived as sustainable and green, and we're at this point saying, no, please throw them away.
Annalisa Holtenberg has a phenomenal resource. Actually, Jane, you have that also posted on the MISA site, and maybe even the MFMA has something on our site that can be used to share that. Jane, I'm gonna let you take that one.
Yeah, I'll post that link to Annalisa's document. Annalisa is our lead trainer for the Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rule here in Minnesota, and she has been spending a lot of her time for the past 2 weeks being on calls and webinars with the national leaders of that program to just collect a lot of information about what we know about the science of how COVID-19 is transmitted and what produce farmers should do to ensure that they're maintaining safe practices. So I am just posting that link to Annalisa's post.
There was also a question from Carl if anything to help old folks and others that do not do computers. And Jane answered that in Grand Rapids, they're moving, I could let you answer, Jane, but they're moving toward their May 6th opener and contemplating having a volunteer take phone calls to help non-tech savvy people place their orders.
We have also taken lots of phone calls.
So you have placed orders via phone calls for people?
Yeah, I have placed orders from customers that come in on the phone, on Facebook Messenger, on email to Sarah. We're going above and beyond for customer service at this point, and it has worked great. I think it also is challenging occasionally to do that.
And I think
we did do a customer survey in the Grand Rapids area to ask how many people would be interested in a assisted shopping or assisted online ordering option. And we're relieved to discover that only about 10% of the survey respondents were interested in that. The vast majority were very interested in online ordering and doing that themselves rather than with phone assistance. So it's probably manageable at 10%.
I just saw something pop up from Kathy. I think she was asking about farmers that were having, or that might have trouble getting on. And I wanted to give an example. So we have a farmer who comes to my winter market who doesn't have phone or email or any way to access those things. And she understandably was feeling a little bit left out. So I had her put together a list of her products and pricing and listed those on our platform on her behalf. And we set up a time to get together and talk after our order close period this week so that I can relay her orders to her so she can prepare them in time for this weekend.
I think this does go back to the fact that, you know, having certainly Jess and then Sarah's role in this is having kind of an amazing, smart, you know, caring people running this is I think part of its success. Somebody asked, Leslie asked about the 14%. Is that for both the vendor and customer? Do you want to go over that again, Jess?
I'm happy to. So the 14% is on top of the vendor's price. So basically it takes the vendor's retail price of their product. If they were selling a product that cost $1, the customer would purchase it for $1.14. And then the market would keep the 14 cents and pay the farmer $1. So it was actually pretty important that we remind our farmers, first, be completely transparent about that. And second, that they don't need to mark their products down. They can if they would like the customer to see the same price that they would at the market. They're certainly welcome to take the 14% cut themselves. But the customers have also been receptive to the fact that this takes work and time to put together, and that's why they cost more than they would at the market if you're buying online.
Thank you. Kathy shared a link to a low tech pre-order, I think it's a webinar out of the University of Kentucky. So that will be on the links we'll share. And then Susan asked, is there a plan for canceling orders and contacting the customers if a vendor begins to feel ill after getting a number of orders? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have seen some guidance on that. Fortunately, we haven't had to deal with it in person yet. I think there's certainly a way to do it, right? Because of this online platform, it's fairly seamless to cancel orders and issue a refund. So the mechanism is in place. We have not had to deal with it yet.
Great. Andrea asks, have you seen this model used at a smaller rural farmers market that have a very small budget? Jane, do you want to talk to that?
Okay, so yes, the population of Rochester, Minnesota is about 115,000 or so. It's going up all the time as the Mayo Clinic expands, but the other markets who have been part of this aggregation project are in smaller areas generally. I think the other large one we have is Richfield, but I'm working with the Grand Rapids, Minnesota market. Grand Rapids is population about 11,000. Aiken, Minnesota is population about 2,200. And then Cook, Minnesota, off the top of my head, I don't remember their population. I think it's around 600 or so. So those are small places. The Cook market is looking at using this model, and they are struggling a little bit with the expenses, particularly manager time, and they're looking at doing it more on a volunteer basis. But they are also looking really strongly at market share boxes for this summer, which would be similar to a CSA share, but multiple farmer and assembled at the market. And then the Aiken market is using the sustainability estimate and considering how much product that they have to sell. They may also struggle with being able to sustain it. But the Grand Rapids market, with a population of 11,000 and a vendor count of about 30, their sustainability estimate is showing that this is possible. So that's kind of the range of the sizes that we've got in here. And Sarah, I wonder if you want to say something about Wabash.
And this is Kathy. I'd also like to jump in on Chisago City. So Chisago City actually is the market that prior to COVID-19, they're the market that really was the closest to break even. And they are projected to break even in 2020. Of course, that's prior to COVID-19, but they're doing it slightly different. They're actually brokering under their wholesale license. So it's a lot less labor intensive. So it's still all online, still automated, but much less labor intensive because they're brokering it. But they actually were the closest to breaking even outside of the grant. I mean, they, on straight up hard business, except they didn't have insurance covered either. So insurance is still out there, but they're the closest.
Well, and I think
Wabasha only.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Wabasha only has 2,400, 2,400 people, 2,500, something like that. Really small community. But I think it actually has a lot to do with, I don't want this to come across the wrong way in any way, shape, or form, but I think it has a lot to do with having a champion in the different communities that can push this out. Somebody that's got some really big drive to make it successful, because it's definitely not seamless yet. There's definitely obstacles along the way. And as we work through those obstacles throughout each of these communities, every community is different, but there's some, I think last week, Jess and I were talking and she said, correct me if I'm quoting it wrong, Jess, but you said that it was the hardest you've ever worked in your life and you've never felt so good about the work that you've accomplished.
Yep, that's pretty much what I said. This stuff matters. And that's why we're willing to put in the work, even though we have no idea if it's sustainable.
And every week it gets easier. So as the week's gone, even now, this week we have put in more hours than the week but I don't anticipate having to do this next week because we've got the systems in place and things are getting easier. So the beginning, it's going to be complicated, but as you get more and more accustomed to it, it's going to be easier and easier.
And I do think that just the system that we've been using, local line, wasn't necessarily completely set up to do what we've been trying to do. And so Sarah in particular has spent hours and hours and hours with them trying to have, or talking with them to tweak the system in ways that work best for this. And fortunately, they've been responsive. They may not have been as fast at getting things done, but they're definitely listening and being helpful. So I think that will make it easier for other people that use this platform because some of those initial early hours of many hours has been figuring some of that out. There was a question here. Elena asked what brokering involved, and Kathy answers, brokering is when a vendor delivers product to a buyer. The market never touches the product. And there's some resources in terms of safely unpacking groceries and handling packaging that we can put on the list of resources that we sent out.
I'm seeing some questions about traceability.
Yes.
So yeah, we absolutely have to maintain traceability. There's a couple ways that we're doing that. The first is with labeling. So the vendor's products are labeled, and then the second, and what we're using to kind of guide and define traceability for each order comes out of local line is the order invoice, and that says on it itemized what products were purchased from what farms. That's fortunate for us because we're also using it to pack the bags, so you can guarantee, and that's what our volunteers, when they're doing their quality control check, they're matching up everything on the invoice with everything in the bag and making sure that it matches.
Great. Andrea asked, before starting this project, how difficult was it to get your boards, those markets that have boards, convinced to see the value of this model?
I think some of my board members are on the call, so they can call me out if I'm totally making this up. But I think it's an unprecedented time, right? And there was some flexibility, some ability to be creative. I was fortunate that several of my board members were able to sell through this model. So they may have seen a benefit to doing it themselves. And then as we've come along, I've invited the board members out to the market, even if they were not selling this time of year, to see it and to see the overwhelming customer response. And I think that has been one of the biggest selling points for my board, is just seeing how well received this is by the community in real life.
Great. All right, let's see. Well, I know, Sarah, do you want to, I mean, I guess you haven't done a drive-through, but just in terms of the aggregation, any of the others of you who have done the aggregation, do you want to speak to the board? Buy-in or not buy-in? Jane?
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
In Wabasha, our board is not as active, and so most of them are vegetable farmers, and they wanted a way to sell to schools, hospitals, and restaurants when we originally got involved in this project. And now we're in the decision-making process in both Red Wing and Wabasha, trying to determine what's the best avenue. And I think we started with polling the vendors. So a vendor survey went out this week, and we're going to look over the results of that by this weekend, and then decide which way we want to go from there. We also want to poll the customers, but we want to start with our vendors first.
Yeah, this is Jane, and I will add that we in Grand Rapids pretty much allowed the customers to guide us. We sent out a customer survey, and that came back with very strong support for multiple hand washing stations in the market, and strong support for online ordering and pickup options. And then a couple other practices too that we, as a member owned organization, voted on pursuing. So the customer survey provided the information that the members needed to make decisions on what practices to pursue, and that's how we did that.
Great. I think one thing that hasn't come up, it's come up for Minnesota, but I know some of those participants aren't from Minnesota, is the licensing. And I don't know, Jane or Kathy, if you want to talk a little bit about, or I could just say that, you know, the licensing differs from state to state. So that's something that if you're in another state and you're going to do the aggregating part, that it would be important to talk with your Department of Ag to see what sorts of licenses you would need.
Correct. It looks like a lot of the people on this webinar are from out of state, and your states may have a different way of handling licensing for these kinds of aggregation activities. So yeah, Jan, I think we shouldn't dive into it for Minnesota because a lot of the people on are not from Minnesota.
So so if you're from another state and you want to do something like this, check with your ag department. Feel free to contact us and we can tell you how, you know, how we got to where we did, because it wasn't doing an aggregation, kind of basically a food hub at a farmer's market without bricks and mortar wasn't an obvious box in the licensing options. And so there was quite a bit of work that members of this team did to figure out how to get licensed correctly and to get both the Department of Ag and the Department of Health to have clarity and to be able to pass that down to their folks on the ground who are out there actually getting the licenses out.
This is Kathy. I have one more question for Jess. It ties in with Andrea's question that she just typed in. So Jess, have you had other farmers that had not sold at your market yet reach out and want to now sell at your market because of this food hub activity?
Yes, and also other markets. And I don't necessarily want to speculate on a webinar, but I think there are some really exciting opportunities for us to work together to provide infrastructure in smaller communities and to help farmers all around us to be part of this platform. So something to keep in mind is for a supplier, they need to sell a certain amount of product to make it worth their time to make the delivery. So the benefit to tying things in with the market is that the vendors are already committed to coming out, or they were, as long as we are able to be open. So we need to think about where and when we're scheduling these aggregation points so that they can serve all sorts of vendors. So no, I haven't enrolled a grower who's not currently part of our market in this system, but I can see that being a really neat way to go forward.
And then I have a follow-up, Sarah. If there were a couple of smaller markets within maybe 15, 20 miles of each other, is it possible for them to share a platform, catalog, whatever you call it, so that they could share that price point? Is that doable or no?
So I've done some considering on this, and that the drive-through model would be a little more complicated because you could only have the pickup located in one location. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have. I'm trying to think my way through this one creatively. We definitely have multiple cities on the Wabasha site. So we have Wabasha, Lake Pepin, Lake City, Kellogg, Nelson are all on the Wabasha platform at this point. And we're trying to decide, definitely deliveries, that's an easy peasy, but a pickup or a drive-through location might make that a little bit more complicated. Unless, yeah, because you would have to have all of the product available for the pickup days. So yes, for deliveries, and not so well for a drive-through type market.
I wanted to see, so Sharon asked a question about cottage foods, and I see Kathy answering it in the chat, but I wanted to put our current approach to cottage foods has been to promote our cottage food vendors' sales off of the platform, and then try to ensure that those products still get into the orders. So Kathy, did you want to talk about the actual regulatory space with cottage foods and a project like this?
Yep. So in Minnesota, it is true. I mean, our cottage food law, has its own particulars like every state's cottage food law. But a cottage food vendor could use any online platform, even a market's online platform, because that's just the sales, just like any other internet. On their listing, they would also have to say these products are homemade and not subject to state inspection. That would have to go on their listing on that online platform. Then once you get to the market, that cottage food producer will have to take payment, just like SNAP. So in that case, SNAP and for cottage food people match up well. But then whereas Jess might have a volunteer carry out the meat and the eggs and the produce in one tub, that one volunteer brings it to that car, the cottage food producer would have to walk their product to that car. So it's clunky in the delivery. They're going to still be there for the 3 or 4 hours of the market, however. So it's a little bit clunky on the delivery, but it could increase their sales. And yes, it would still be legal.
All right, other questions? Sharon mentions that Rochester Systems, the vendors in the hub are selling product to the market. And that is correct. The market is officially taking ownership of that product in between the.
That's true for the product that the market is handling the money for, but as Kathy just described, and it is hard to kind of get your head around it. It's a little complicated because of the way our cottage food laws are, but the cottage food producers can still advertise their products on the sales platform. Right. They just have to identify which ones are cottage food, and then the local line sales platform cannot handle the money for them. So the only thing the cottage food producers are doing is advertising their product in the same online catalog as the other vendors. And then the actual sales, the transaction of exchanging money for product has to be done by that cottage food producer with that customer. That's the part that can't go through the market.
Great. We need one of those nice little diagrams that Jess made. For the You're very good at that, Jess. How soon do the vendors get paid?
That's a great question. So and I think lots of markets have a reimbursement system that's associated with our tokens system. So the vendors are fairly well accustomed to that. They turn in their tokens at markets, and we do paychecks once a month in the winter and every other week in the summer. With this project, because those are just checks that I'm writing, we wanted the vendors to get paid as soon as possible. So those who I was able to agree on their total and we didn't have any issues at the market, I paid that day at market. I think it's much more reasonable that I would pay them probably at the next market. And then with the COVID situation, I put a lot of checks in the mail last week.
Great. Do the vendors pay, okay, you may have answered this, but do the vendors pay a fee to be on the site?
Right now, they do not. Cost of the site is paid for by the market.
Great. So what if any is the plan to deliver directly to companies for their employees or direct to home?
Yeah, so right now the plan is volunteer drivers. I'm seeing some suggestions in the chat about other delivery mechanisms. One of our vendors, actually several of our vendors have extremely robust delivery systems built into their businesses. And so because we're a community, we have explored the idea of batching orders with those orders. So those are some ideas. I personally am not the biggest fan of the farmers market owning a vehicle or maintaining it. So ways that we can get around that will be great, but that might also be a way forward.
Yeah, and some interesting suggestions like using Bite Squad or a vendor who already has a reefer truck. Lots of good ideas. So, okay, any other questions? We are now at, I don't know, where are we at? We're at 2:38. We have the space until 3, but we also don't have to stay until 3 if people have had their questions answered, and you can always reach out to me and I can pass on questions to Jess or to whoever you'd like me to pass them on to. And I will, I repeat, I will put together kind of a list of the resources and send it to everyone who signed up for the webinar. Any other questions?
Yeah, Jan, grab that one from Kay Jensen. What, if any, is the plan to deliver directly to companies for their employees or direct to home, which is actually what we originally designed this food hub for. That was like a wholesale, and that's kind of what Sarah did, right? With her market share?
Mm-hmm.
Or did you already answer that one?
I think we answered the direct to home. I think in terms of the employees. Sarah or Jess, do you want to?
I want to grab that one because down in Wabasha, we did that in several different locations. So the local hospital wanted to encourage this to their employees. And so they allowed me to do a drop site at the local hospital, and they put it in their kitchen. I would deliver it to the kitchen where they had the walk-in cooler. And when the staff was complete, once that was done with their shift, they were able to grab it out of the walk-in cooler. They could prepay, so I didn't have to worry about anything that way. So they pushed it out. So I was able to add that extra drop site, and I just put for St. Elizabeth staff only. And we also did that with a local government center, so that health and Tina, so it was the SHIP office, the Department of Health and Human Services office. We were able to do that to include the local prison and the street division. The city really wanted to support the program there, so we offered a drop site at Health and Human Services for market share boxes and then added anything else. I wouldn't be opposed. So we did do market share boxes, which is very similar to a CSA, and we were adding drop sites at local coffee shops and some flower shops. They were happy to allow us to do drop sites where things could be picked up that way. It's just creatively thinking through who has refrigeration and space and how we can promote this in light of the COVID situation.
Great. All right. Well, I am not seeing, I'm seeing a few more resources, but I'm not seeing any additional questions. So I think we will take that as time to close this up. I just want to thank Jess in particular for being courageous and jumping into this and pulling it together so quickly, and then being so generous and sharing the information and putting together such good slides. And Sarah too, for your role in that, and then all the team members who've helped make this happen, and then all of you who have joined today. Thank you for joining, and hope to hear if any of you go on to try something like this, that you'll share back with us, because I'm sure other people will have different experiences and we can learn from each other. So I think with that, we will say goodbye and be safe and be well. And thanks again.
Thanks, Jen.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.